My life, Jax's, a 19-year-old freshman at the Interstellar Academy, seemed to revolve solely around complex astrophysics lectures and long nights of research. Everything was calm until I met Lyra. Lyra was no mortal. She was the mother of Zoe, my closest friend since childhood. Zoe and I grew up together on Nebula Cloud Station, a small, floating community on the Cygnus star belt. We weren't romantically involved, nor were we constant text buddies. We were simply two perfect pieces amidst the chaos of the cosmos. Zoe was always where I found the most peace. She was sweet, kind, sometimes a little silly, but she always remembered my birthday. To me, Zoe was an integral part of my life's orbit, but never its center. I often went to Zoe's quarters. At first it was for study groups, then it became a habit. Her home was just a few space blocks from mine, and every time I went, I was greeted by Lyra, Zoe's mother. Lyra lived with her daughter in a small unit with a balcony, overflowing with exotic cosmic flora and white curtains that always fluttered in the energy winds. Lyra was the kind of woman who made you pause a second longer when you looked at her. Not because she was young, but because there was something quiet and appealing about her, as if she held an entire galaxy yet to be told. Lyra had divorced when Zoe was young, never remarried, and rarely left the unit unless necessary. I still called her Miss Lyra, a term that was half respectful, half familiar. She always smiled, poured me a glass of chilled meteor honey nectar, or offered freshly baked stardust cookies, then left me alone with Zoe. And then one day I saw Lyra standing in the kitchen. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the window, falling on her iridescent violet hair, loosely tied back with a carved wooden clip. She was wearing a thin, shimmering white silk shirt and cream-colored slacks, washing dishes. Her wrists were stained with a few drops of glowing soap suds like miniature nebulae. And I looked a little longer. Strange, I told myself. I've been here so many times. Why does it feel different today? Maybe it was the light. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was because Zoe wasn't home. I arrived earlier than scheduled, and Lyra was the one who opened the door. I thought Zoe was busy with her study group today, she said, tilting her head slightly. I scratched my head. Yeah, I came by a little early to get some old test papers. I thought someone was home, so I didn't dare come in. Lyra smiled and stepped aside. Come in, Jax. I walked in, trying not to let my eyes wander. I didn't know then that this was the first time I began to feel that Lyra was no longer just Lyra, my best friend's mother, but an alien woman, and the distance between us suddenly wasn't as clear as before. From that day on, I began to notice things I'd never noticed before. Lyra was present in every familiar corner of the unit, not in a loud presence, but in very small traces. The scent of crystal laundry solution on Zoe's handkerchief, the soft cosmic jazz music playing from the living area, the glass of meteor honey nectar always placed right where I sat every time I visited. She never asked what I wanted, but always prepared the exact stardust cookie I always picked up from the cafe near the academy. Not because she tried to remember, but because she was always observant and very quiet. One time, Zoe was busy with a study group at the library, so I was asked to stop by her place to pick up a group document. Lyra was the one who answered the door. I waited on the porch as usual, but she said, "Come in, it's too warm out here." I hesitated a bit. It was still a chilly April day, but there was sunshine that day, the kind of warm, gentle sunshine, just enough to make people's hearts flutter. I walked in. The unit was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking. Lyra turned away, pouring water. She was wearing a thin, pale gray bio-knit sweater, the light filtering through the fabric making her back appear clearly. My throat suddenly felt dry. "Sit down, Jax. I just baked a stellar butter cake." Her voice was as gentle as ever, but this time I felt something softer, closer. I sat down on the sofa by the window, my back slightly straight, my hands resting on my thighs, as if afraid of touching something. Lyra put the plate of cake on the table, then sat on the opposite side. No one spoke for a long time. There was only the sound of the clock and the wind blowing through the thin curtains. Sometimes silence speaks louder than any conversation, and that day, the thing I heard most clearly was my heartbeat. I don't know if Lyra noticed the look I tried to hide every time she bent down to pour tea or when her hand brushed the back of the chair when she stood up. But I knew one thing for sure. I was feeling her differently. Not in a longing way, but with a confused curiosity. It was as if I was standing in front of a strange chamber, the door ajar, just waiting for me to enter. And I was both scared and unable to look away. In the following days, I saw Zoe less often at home. Once she texted, "I'm going to the gym. My mom's home if you come over, ask her." I don't know why I went to Zoe's place for group exercises, out of habit or because I wanted to see Lyra's eyes again. Every time I went, Lyra smiled. Her gestures were still gentle, still measured, but there was something in her eyes that made me no longer know where I stood, between you and the man, between the guest and the one lost in the private world of a woman who had experienced life. That night I went home, lay on my bed, eyes wide open. There was no image as Joe in my mind, no group work. There was only a pair of gentle hands placing a cup of tea on the table, a thin light gray bio-knit sweater, a pair of eyes looking straight at me, not asking, not forcing, but making me unable to not think. I had seen Lyra countless times throughout my academy years. She had taken us on cosmic picnics, reminded me not to forget my atmospheric coat when the weather changed, silently watched me eat a third slice of pizza nebula at Zoe's birthday party without saying a word. But all of that had been just a faint background in the picture of life. I was used to her presence like I was used to the window blinds at Zoe's unit, always swaying gently, always there, always in place, never drawing attention. It was only when I grew a little older, a little quieter, that I began to see Lyra was not as ordinary as I had thought. She was not young, but beautiful in a way that made people want to be silent when looking at her. Her face was not sharp, but her eyes had depth. Her voice was not trying to be gentle, but every word she uttered seemed to touch the inside of my chest. Nothing fancy, and that simplicity is what makes people unable to take their eyes off her. One time, Zoe went to the gym and told me to stop by to pick up my data pad. I walked into the unit as usual. Lyra was sitting on the living room sofa, her legs tucked up, reading a thick book with a crimson velvet astro cover. "Zoe told me you'd be by," she said, her eyes fixed on the page. I stood awkwardly in the doorway. I'll just grab my stuff and go." Lyra didn't look up. "Take your time, it's raining outside. Have a cup of tea before you go." I sat down on the opposite chair, listening to the rain patter on the porch roof. The only sounds in the room were wind, rain, and the sound of pages turning. Lyra didn't say anything more, but I felt strangely peaceful. I watched her hair fall gently to her shoulders, the silver strands mixed with the deep gold, undisguised, undyed. Even that made her different. Lyra doesn't run away from age, she makes time beautiful. I don't know exactly when I started to feel for Lyra. All I know is every time I look at her, I no longer see a mother of a close friend, but a woman. Quiet, lonely, and worth touching. From that day on, I began to notice every little detail. She often wears a silver ring with a single blue-green opal on her right middle finger. There is always a bottle of orange ginger astral oil in the corner of the kitchen, and she likes to leave the radio playing old cosmic ballads, nameless melodies, when Zoe is not around. Lyra and I often chatted briefly, but gradually those conversations became longer. We talked about holobooks, about old exofilms, about little things like the smell of celestial wood on rainy days, or the way tea cools quickly in a thin porcelain star cup. We talked as if we didn't need to try, and that's what confuses me. One day, as I stood up to leave, Lyra handed me a bag of Stardust cookies. "You made too much. Zoe doesn't like sweets. I'll take them home and eat them later." I took them, nodding slightly. "Thank you." Lyra looked at me, her eyes wanting to say something, but then stopped. "Jax," she said, "it's been a long time since I felt like someone in the unit didn't make me feel lonely." I stood still. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know how to respond. I just smiled slightly, scratching my head. "I'm glad you came." From that time on, I couldn't look at Lyra the same way again. I started waiting for Zoe's text message saying she wasn't home. I started picking convenient times to drop by, even if there was no clear reason. I told myself, just to borrow a holobook, just to return a data crystal, just to stop by. But my heart was no longer that simple. One day, I went to Zoe's unit when she was away. Lyra was pruning lumina flowers on the porch, her hands in thin bio-gloves, her collar stained with a few drops of water from watering the plants. She turned when she heard the airspeeder. Her eyes caught mine, and she smiled. Not surprised, not fake, as if she knew I would come. I got out of the airspeeder, trying to act casual, but each step was heavier than usual. I'll go get Zoe's sketch pad. We have a group project to turn in. My voice was softer than usual. Lyra nodded slightly. It's on the dining table. Take it. I'll be in the garden for a while. I walked in, walking slowly. Every time it was just me and her in this unit, the atmosphere changed. Quieter, softer, but also as fragile as the thin layer of mist in front of a mirror, gone with a breath. I found my sketch pad but didn't leave right away. I stood by the window, looking out onto the porch. Lyra was pruning nebula lavender. The late sunlight filtered through the porch, casting a soft glow over her shoulders. Her golden brown hair was loosely tied, and the gentle wind blew a few strands up against her cheeks, and for the first time I admitted to myself, I wanted her. It wasn't just physical attraction. It was the feeling of being pulled into a deep soul, a woman who had lived so quietly for so long that the space around her had become fragile. I don't know if Lyra noticed, but I knew very well there was something between us that I couldn't name, but that had begun to grow quietly and meaningfully. Another time when I was fixing the window latch for Zoe, Lyra brought me a glass of solar lemonade. She stood behind me for a long moment before setting the glass down on the table. I appreciate you stopping by to help. Her voice was low and slow. It was unclear whether she was speaking to me or simply letting it out into the air. I turned around. Her eyes stopped on my wrist, where there was a small bandage from yesterday's accident. Are you hurt? I nodded. It's okay, just a little. Lyra reached out and gently touched the bandage. Her fingers were colder than I thought, but the concern was so hot it choked me. I held my gaze for a beat longer than necessary. She didn't pull her hand away right away. That night I couldn't sleep, not because the gesture was too big, but because I started dreaming about that hand on my chest, holding my beating heart still. If there's one afternoon that I'll always remember, it's that one. Not because of the big things, but because it started with the smallest things. A text message, a faucet, a nightgown. It was Friday. The sun was shining. Not too bright. Spring was in its midterms. The sky trees were starting to green again. The sky was high and clear as a thin layer of glass. Zoe texted me around noon. I have a long lab this afternoon. Can you come by and pick up my workbook? My mom's home. I typed, okay, and sent it without thinking much about it. At the time, I just felt relieved, not because I was asked to help, but because Lyra would be home. I arrived around 4 p.m. The sunlight slanted through the sky trees on both sides of the street, casting golden streaks on the grav walk. Zoe's unit was quiet. The olive green door was open as usual. I walked up the steps and knocked lightly. Lyra's voice came from inside the unit. The door's unlocked, Jax. Come in. I pushed the door open and entered. The familiar scent of orange peel astral oil still hung in the air. Sunlight filtered through the white curtains and fell on the polished cosmic wood floor. And then I saw her. Lyra stood at the end of the hallway, holding a towel to dry her hair, wearing a thin, shimmering, silvery silk nightgown that fell just above her knees. The light reflected off the fabric, making her body appear as if it were a mist, soft and almost transparent. We stood still for a few seconds. Neither of us say anything. I was about to turn away, but Lyra spoke first. I just washed my hair. Sorry, I didn't have time to change. Her voice was low, not embarrassed at all, just a little surprised. I was flustered. It's okay. I just stopped by to get Zoe's notebook. Lyra nodded slightly and pointed to the kitchen. But by the way, Jax, can I ask you a favor? I looked at her. What is it? The faucet in the bathroom is loose. I can't tighten it. Can you help me check? I followed her upstairs. Each step on the cosmic wood steps creaked slightly. My heart was pounding, not because I was scared, but because I didn't understand what was happening inside me. The small bathroom was bright thanks to the window that let in the sunlight. The faucet on the sink was dripping. Lyra pointed. "It's loose here. Can you help me tighten it?" I bent down to check. Lyra was standing behind me very close. I don't know how hard I turned. I only remember there was a click sound, and then the faucet turned on. Water sprang straight at me. I backed away lightly, hitting the wall. Lyra was startled. "Oh my God!" Water splashed. In less than 3 seconds, both of us were soaked. The thin nightgown pressed against her body, revealing every line of her gleaming golden skin. I turned away immediately. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." Lyra didn't answer. She was trying to turn the water back on. I ran to turn off the main faucet. The bathroom was filled with a damp smell, with the late light coming through the window, and with a long silence, as if we were both trying to catch our breath. When I turned around, I saw Lyra standing in front of the mirror. Her wet hair hung down to her shoulders. Her nightgown was soaked, hugging her body like a second skin. Every curve of her tawny, luminous form was exposed, like an unspoken confession. She turned back to look at me. That look no longer confused, only tiredness and something very real, very human. "Can you get me a towel from the bedroom?" I walked into Lyra's bedroom. The window was slightly open, and the afternoon breeze blew in like a breath. A smoky blue silk alien blanket covered the bed. The corner of the dressing table was neat, and the small bottle of Nebula perfume was still in its original place. Everything was quiet, a little lonely, and very feminine. I took the large towel from the chair. When I turned around, I stopped. Lyra was standing in the middle of the hallway, her hair dripping water onto her shoulders. She reached out and took the towel. No one said anything. I felt my hand tremble as the towel touched hers. Lyra placed the towel on her shoulder, then smiled slightly, a tired, accepting, defenseless smile. "I'm sorry for making you so wet." Her voice seemed to touch a certain chord inside me. I shook my head. "It's okay, it's just, I feel like I'm bothering you too much." Lyra looked at me for a long time. There was no reproach in that look, no surprise, just a gentle sadness, as if she was used to people coming into her life and then quietly leaving. I stood there, wet, from head to toe. My t-shirt stuck to my back, my hair dripping onto the cosmic wood floor. The wind blew through my shirt, cold, but inside I was getting hotter by the second. "Do you have any clothes I can change into?" I asked, my voice half as soft as a whisper. Lyra nodded. She walked into the room, took out a white cotton shirt. I took it, then turned away. I was about to go into the bathroom to change, but then stopped because I knew if I went in there, put on a shirt, dried myself, left this unit, everything would still be safe. It would still be the same. It would still be Jax, Zoe's friend. It would still be Lyra, my best friend's mother. But I also knew I didn't want to go back to the way it was. I turned around. Lyra was still standing there, her hands gently squeezing the edge of the towel. "Are you cold?" she asked, almost whispering. I nodded, not looking into her eyes. Lyra approached. The distance between us was no longer a room. There was only breath and heartbeat. She raised her hand, gently wiping the remaining tear from my cheek with her fingertips. I didn't step back. I didn't avoid it. I just closed my eyes. A very short moment, but it lasted like a beat of life. Then I opened my eyes, and Lyra was standing very close. She looked at me, her eyes gentle but sincere, as if asking, "Are you sure?" And I, with my eyes, answered, "Yes, I'm sure." I leaned down. The kiss came without haste, without demanding. It was like something that had been written, just waiting for time to happen. It was not like the kisses I had had. There was no rush of youth, no shaky hands, clumsy lips, just slow, warm, and real. When our lips parted, Lyra let out a soft breath. She rested her forehead on my shoulder, saying nothing. I wrapped my arms around her, not like a woman 20 years older than me, but like someone who had not been truly hugged in too long. Neither of us said it out loud, but we both understood. We had just crossed a line, and neither of us would ever go back to the way we were before. I don't know why I kissed her that day, or rather, I don't know why I waited until that day to kiss her. Lyra, the woman I once thought was just a shadow in my best friend's unit, that day became a new chapter that I couldn't stop. That night I came home in the loose white shirt Lyra had given me. My hair was still damp, and the smell of fabric softener from the Cygnus system on the towel still lingered on my collar. I walked into my room, closing the door quietly as if I was afraid someone would hear my heartbeat. Then I sat on the edge of the bed. Silence. I tried not to remember the kiss. I tried not to think about the feeling of her arms around me, warm and trembling like an emotion she had been trying to hide for years. I tried to forget the way she whispered when our lips touched. "Are you sure?" I sat there for hours, no lights on, no comm device. Only one sentence kept repeating in my head. What did I do? I was Zoe's best friend. I was the son Lyra often cooked for, poured tea for, treated like family. I was not allowed to cross that line. But then another thought crept in. Very small, very faint, but clear. But if it's false, why does it feel so true? The next day, I didn't go to Zoe's unit. I made an excuse that I was busy. And then the next day I was busy again. A week passed. I still didn't go back. But every time I passed that neighborhood on my way home, my heart skipped a beat, as if something had been left behind the olive green gate. Saturday night, I got a text from Lyra. Not from Zoe, just a simple line. "You left your sketch pad here. Stop by if you want." I stared at the text for a long time. I knew I hadn't left anything, but I also knew I wanted to go back. I got to Zoe's unit around 5 p.m. It was cloudy, not as sunny as the day before. The wind was stronger. The celestial maple tree in front of the unit swayed as if calling. The door opened. Lyra stood there. She was wearing a caramel-colored thermal knit sweater and dark pants. Her hair was loose and wavy. "You came faster than I thought." Her voice carried no obvious emotion. But her eyes were different. A mixture of anticipation and caution. I walked into the unit. Everything was the same, but the atmosphere between us was different. There was no explanation. No one mentioned what had happened. But the silence was longer than ever. Lyra poured me tea and sat down on the chair across from me. She held the cup in her hand but didn't drink. We talked about the weather, about the upcoming exam, about Zoe registering for a new course. Everything was so normal it was unbearable. I let out a sentence like an exhalation that day. "I'm sorry." Lyra put down her cup of tea and looked up. "For what?" I was confused. "For screwing things up." She smiled very faintly, a tired, accepting smile. "You didn't screw things up. Things were already screwed up." I stood up. I didn't know why. Maybe to leave, maybe to get away. But as I passed her, Lyra put her hand on my wrist, very gently, and for the second time, I couldn't stop. Her hand touched my wrist very lightly, not holding, not pulling, just a touch as if asking, "Are you sure this time you won't run away again?" And I stood still. We didn't look at each other for long. Neither of us said a word. Lyra let go. She turned around, walked slowly up the stairs, not looking back. I watched her back, and then I followed. Lyra's bedroom was the same as last time, a light scent of orange astral oil, the curtains fluttering in the wind. She stood with her back to me, took off her thin thermal knit sweater, and hung it on a hook. The gesture was very slow, not shy, not hiding, just a woman who was too used to emptiness, allowing herself to be close again. I walked up behind her, not touching, just standing close. Lyra turned around. We faced each other without covering up, without saying a word of apology, without making excuses for what was about to happen. She touched my cheek. That look was no longer a look, but a deep silence containing a lifetime of waiting. I don't remember who kissed first. I just remember this time there was no hesitation, no more avoidance, just two people leaning against each other to fill the empty spaces in their hearts that neither of them would say. Lyra's body was soft, not perfect like the young girls I had known, but warm and suffocating. When I ran my hand down her spine, I felt her emerald skin was a little cold. But her hand on my heart, it was hot. We wrapped around each other slowly, almost silently, just breathing the sound of two souls colliding, not because of passion, but because of being alone for so long. We lay next to each other after that, saying nothing. She rested her head on my shoulder, eyes closed. Her hand was still holding mine lightly, but enough for me to know she didn't want to let go. I stared at the ceiling, empty and full at the same time. There was no joy like a victory, no fire like a conquest. Only one sentence rang in my head like a distant echo. "I just lost something, and I don't know if I can get it back." I put my shirt back on as it began to get dark. Lyra sat on the edge of the bed, her back to me. She didn't speak, nor did she make me stay. Only when I was about to walk out the door did she call softly, "Jax." I stopped, turned my head. Lyra didn't look at me. She just said, "This can't happen again. Do you understand?" I didn't answer. I just nodded and walked out of the unit. After that first time, I didn't go back to Lyra's unit right away. I told Zoe I was busy, that I had to work overtime at the data archives, that I was tired. I wasn't a very good liar, but Zoe believed me too much. I thought I would stop. I really wanted to stop. But inside, something was still unfinished. A few days later, I went back. No invitation, no text. I went out of habit. I stood in front of the familiar olive door, and Lyra was there. She opened the door before I could knock. "You came just in time for the tea to be made." She spoke as if I were still Jax, Zoe's old friend. We didn't talk about the day before. No one asked what happened today. There was just a silence that was growing between us, a kind of gentle complicity, one that no one would name. I don't remember exactly how we started the second time. Maybe it was when Lyra poured me tea and her hand brushed my wrist. Maybe it was when I stood behind her in the kitchen, close enough to hear my heart pounding. Maybe it was when Lyra looked at me, not speaking, but her eyes like an apology that never needed to be said. The second time came more gently, less confused, more certain. And the third time, it was obvious. We weren't in love. We didn't say sweet words. We just came to each other when the space in each other's hearts started to grow cold. Usually in the afternoon, when Zoe was at the academy or out of town, I'd stop by to pick up something, return a hollow book, borrow a data drive, any reason small enough to make me walk through that door again. And then, no reason at all. We got used to not having to speak. Get used to the blue silk alien blanket. Get used to the way Lyra unclasped her hair before lying down. Get used to the way I put my jacket on the chair without asking, "Is it okay?" Once while we were lying next to each other, Lyra asked, "Have you ever loved anyone?" I was silent for a moment. "Yes, but not like this." "What is this?" I turned to look at her. "It's not like love, but it's not like not loving either." Lyra smiled, nodding slightly. "Yeah, I think so too. There's no definition between Lyra and me. It's not love, but it can't be called playing around either. We're just holding on to each other so we don't drift away in the days that followed. Lyra and I saw each other more often, but we never named what was happening between us. No promises, no expectations, just quiet comings and goings. One day I just sat on the sofa with her, listening to an old cosmic ballad. Another day Lyra stood cooking dinner while I fixed a shorted electrical outlet in the kitchen. No one mentioned what we were because we both knew if we called everything would probably fall apart. I started avoiding Zoe. Not because I hated her, but because I couldn't look her in the eye when I was holding such a big secret. One time she called me 3 times about an urgent group assignment, and I didn't answer. Not because I didn't see her, but because I was in bed with her mother. It was the first time I actually felt bad. Not morally guilty, but guilty of betraying a trust, even though no one had given me any responsibility. Lyra seemed to sense it too. One evening as we lay side by side, she spoke softly and sadly, "Jax, this can't go on forever, you know." I stared at the ceiling, silent. She continued, her voice breaking, "Not because I don't want to, but because one day Zoe will find out, and then you'll regret it." I turned around, about to say something, but I didn't say anything, because I knew she was right. But I also knew something else. I couldn't stop. There was something about Lyra that pulled me back every time I tried to leave. Partly because she made me feel needed, partly because with her, I didn't have to prove anything. I didn't have to be strong. I didn't have to be happy. I just had to be real. And Lyra accepted me as I was. I wasn't as carefree as I'd been, though. I started to jump every time I heard the sound of the door locking. Every time the comm device rang at Lyra's unit, my heart skipped a beat. We became more reserved. We always checked to see if Zoe was home. Once Lyra almost accidentally texted Zoe instead of me, just a single line. "Are you coming this afternoon?" And she deleted it, her hands shaking like they were holding a time bomb. Figure something was slipping away from us, but strangely, neither of us wanted to hold on. We were just delaying the end, like people who know the collision is coming but still drive with our eyes closed, just because we don't want to stop in the middle of the grav road. Zoe was the first girl I was close to without feeling the need to try. We shared a desk since 10th grade. I remember the first time she asked to borrow a pen, then a xenobiology textbook, then the habit of tapping her pen on the edge of the desk whenever she was bored. Gradually, no one mentioned the question, "Are we close?" because it was so obvious. We studied together, ate lunch together, sometimes did group work together. I often went to her unit to review or watch holo movies on weekends. Sometimes Zoe fell asleep on the sofa, and I covered her with a blanket. Sometimes she texted in the middle of the night just to ask, "Do you think my lunar cat is depressed?" And I replied reflexively. All of that I considered pure friendship. But now, looking back, I realize, it turns out I was the one who never asked, "Is it pure with Zoe?" She never said it, never showed that she needed me the way a girl who secretly liked her friend would. Zoe didn't fight, didn't sulk, didn't send ambiguous messages. She was just there. Always the one who remembered my exam days, always the one who sent short greetings before presentations, always the one who knew I preferred stellar chicken sandwiches to Terra beef, and always the one who laughed out loud when I pretended to be serious. I used to think it was attachment without strings, but it was actually attachment. I just wasn't sophisticated enough to see it. One time I had a high fever, my eyes were blurry, my body was tired. I didn't feel like eating. Zoe was the one who cooked nutrient porridge, brought it to my unit, and sat there waiting for me to finish eating. I remember her peeling off each pill and telling me, "Take this after eating. This pill will help lower your fever quickly." I fell asleep while she was still sitting on the cosmic wood chair near the bed. When I woke up, she was back, leaving a note. "Remember to eat enough next time. Don't make me cook nutrient porridge again." I laughed when I read it, but I never thought much about that action. Now that I think about it, I realize Zoe never asked for anything, but she always gave. I never thought she could love me, maybe because I was too stupid, maybe because I was so used to having her around that I took it for granted. But feelings, if not seen, gradually became scratches. I noticed that recently, Zoe often looked at me longer when I was absent-minded. Her eyes were no longer as innocent as before. Something had changed, but I was so absorbed in another woman at that time that I forgot about the girl who was silently loving me without ever saying anything. I started remembering every little detail. Things that I used to take for granted now took on a new meaning. Every time Zoe stayed silent when I told her about another girl, every time she cooked my favorite dish without asking, every time I was late, she waited for me, not angry. They were all signs, but I ignored them. I remember one time we went shopping for data shirts at the Star Mall. Zoe picked up a black t-shirt, held it in front of me and said, "This looks good on you." I tried it on, then bought it without thinking. But that day, when I jokingly asked if I had a girlfriend, "Do you think she would like me to dress like this?" Zoe just smiled a sad, short smile, then turned away. At the time, I didn't understand why. Now I know. I also remember the look in her eyes on my birthday. We sat at a familiar Astro Cafe. Zoe gave me a notebook, a brown leather cover, engraved with my name. I asked, "Why a notebook?" She replied, "So you can write down things you shouldn't forget." At that time, I just smiled and put it aside. But that night when I posted a story thanking her, I only tagged a few other friends, forgetting about her. The next day, Zoe was still talking normally, but I noticed her eyes were red. Now, when I think back on those things, I don't just feel sorry, I feel selfish. I took all the love Zoe silently gave me, but never once stopped to ask, "Are you okay?" I took her presence for granted, but now that certainty was slowly disappearing, and I was starting to feel the void it left. Lyra once asked me, "Do you think Zoe knows?" I shook my head, but honestly, I wasn't sure. Zoe wasn't stupid. She was perceptive, observant. Maybe she had suspected. Maybe she had sensed something had changed. It's just she doesn't want to admit it, just like I didn't want to admit she's been in my heart somehow for a long time. I don't know if I love Zoe, but I know if there's one person in my life I shouldn't hurt, it's her. And I know I've started to do it, even before anyone said anything. The last time I saw Zoe smile, I saw that her eyes weren't as innocent as before. Something was darker, as if she was holding in a rain that hadn't fallen yet. And I was afraid that one day that rain would fall, and I would be the one standing there without an umbrella. That night I went home, stretched out on my bed. The notebook Zoe had given me still on the nightstand. I opened it. The first page was blank. I picked up a pen, wrote one line, just one line. What you shouldn't forget. There was someone who loved you in silence. It was Wednesday. I remember it because it was drizzling enough to darken the grav walks, but not enough to make anyone carry an umbrella. I was on my way home from the academy when I got a text from Zoe. I'm cleaning out Mom's closet this afternoon and washing the blankets. Will you have dinner with me tonight? I typed, whatever, and put my comm device in my pocket. I glanced at the clock, 5:22. At that time, as usual, Lyra was home alone, and we were there too, as a habit no one dared to name. But today, Zoe came home early. I don't know exactly what happened in that unit at that moment. I just replayed it over and over again, like trying to picture the moment a heart was squeezed. Lyra's bedroom was usually neat. Zoe went in there with the intention of folding the pile of sweaters she had left on the chair. She put the bag of clothes on the bed, bent down to pull open the drawer near the bedside table. Then she saw the box. A small, unlocked box set against the wall, as if it had been hidden carelessly, not really meant to be discovered, but not carefully enough to prevent someone from finding it. Zoe opened it. Inside were a few bio-condoms left in their blister packs and a few used packs, neatly folded in their paper sleeves. That might not have bothered her if it hadn't been for the second thing. A black t-shirt neatly folded, placed just below it. That shirt. Zoe and I had picked it out together at the Star Mall last summer. She was the one who said it looked good on me, the one who paid for it first, even though I hadn't had time to take out my credit chip. The one who first called me jokingly, "It's my boyfriend's, keep it safe." Zoe picked up the shirt slowly. Her hands were shaking slightly. The light from the window slanted through her hair. Maybe at that moment she couldn't believe it. Maybe she was still searching for an explanation, a rational reason why the shirt was here, in her mother's room, next to something it shouldn't be. But all that theory collapsed when Zoe opened the bottom drawer. A familiar scent rushed out, the cosmic detergent she'd smelled on my shirt a few times recently. At that moment, I thought she hadn't cried yet. Zoe wasn't the type to cry right away. She was the type to endure, and then when she couldn't bear it any longer, the tears would fall silently, without a single sob. And I knew that was the most painful kind of crying. Zoe stood there for a long time. No one knew exactly how long, maybe only a few minutes. But in those minutes, a part of her changed forever. She was no longer the girl who laughed at my nonsense, no longer the best friend who waited for me outside the data archives door, come rain or shine. In that moment, Zoe became someone who was facing the deepest betrayal a heart could endure. And it came from the two people she trusted the most. She put the shirt back, she closed the drawer, she pushed the box back into place. Everything looked as if it had never been touched. But Zoe's eyes were different. There was nothing to hide what had just happened in her head. As she stepped out of the room, Zoe heard a small laugh from the living area, from the second-floor balcony. Not loud, not clear, but enough to make you stop. She leaned over and looked down. Lyra and I had just entered the unit. I was still holding a paper bag, and inside was Lyra's favorite Stellar cake. We didn't know Zoe was back. She'd said she'd be in the data archives until the evening, and as usual, we let ourselves go unguarded. Unguarded, as if our secret was a given. Zoe stood there, looking down. She saw me bend down to take off my grav boots, saw Lyra step closer to me, smiling softly, saw her hands on my shoulders, familiar. And then that brief touch became undeniable. Living proof. I turned about to say something when my eyes met Zoe's, standing on the stairs. The light from the door behind her framing her in a brilliant, beautiful, painful silence. Lyra stopped too. The space froze as if time had been compressed into a single look. No one said anything. Zoe walked down the stairs slowly. Each step seemed to bring 1,000 questions, accusations, and pain boiling under the surface. She stopped 3 steps away from us, looking at them both. No screaming, no crying, no shaking. Her voice was low, soft, almost a whisper. "You two killed everyone." I didn't have time to say anything. Neither did Lyra. Zoe passed us like a cold wind, no turning, no braking. But that silence was the loudest bang. I don't remember what I was thinking when Zoe said, "You two killed everyone." and left quietly. I stood frozen in the middle of the living area. Lyra didn't either. We didn't look at each other. We didn't call out to her. Everything felt broken, but there was no sound. I heard Zoe's door close above me. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in my head it resonated like a hammer hitting the softest part of my heart. Lyra sat down on the chair, her hands shaking slightly, but she didn't cry. She just raised her hand to her forehead, as if trying to sort out the emotions that were spilling out of her self-control. I stood in the middle of the room. I didn't know whether to stay or go. The unit suddenly felt cramped, not because of the space, but because of the look Zoe left. The look made me feel like a stranger invading the place I should have cherished the most. "Jax?" Lyra spoke, her voice was small. I didn't turn around. "I'm sorry," she continued, but then couldn't say anything more. The apology hung in the air, unable to find a place to land. I exhaled a long breath. My mind was spinning. Everything came back to me like fragments of a holofilm. Zoe's eyes on the stairs, the t-shirt in the drawer, the furtive touches between me and Lyra, and my own laughter, which had sounded just a few minutes ago down the hall, the exact moment Zoe stepped out of the darkness of trust. I used to think that when I was discovered, I would be afraid. But no, the feeling at that moment wasn't fear, it was loss. An irreparable loss, because I knew from the moment Zoe's eyes met mine that day, everything between us was dead. I went upstairs. I stood in front of Zoe's door. I didn't knock, I just stood there. My hand touched the cold door. I wanted to call her name, but my throat felt blocked. I stood there for a moment longer, then turned away. I left the unit in the sunless afternoon. The sky was gray, the wind was cold, as if the very air itself were complicit in my emptiness. I didn't say goodbye, didn't slam the door, just walked. Each step felt heavier with the things I couldn't take with me. Faith of friendship, the best part of myself. I don't know how long Lyra stayed in the living area after that, but I imagined it. She would sit still, not turning on the lights. The room would darken as the light outside faded. Maybe she had the holoscreen on, but didn't pay attention. Maybe she heard noises upstairs. Zoe's footsteps, the water running in the sink, but didn't dare say anything. Lyra was a woman of experience. She had lost so much. A marriage, a belief in love, and now her own hands were helping to push away the last thing she should have kept, her daughter. I imagined Lyra sitting there, her eyes staring blankly down at my hands. Maybe for the first time in all, she hated herself and me. And I knew I had started hating myself since Zoe came down the stairs. In the room upstairs, Zoe sat on the bed, her back against the wall. Her eyes were dry. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. In her hand was the black t-shirt I used to wear. She held it tightly to her chest, as if she were holding on to an old memory, a memory that had been crushed in just one afternoon. On the desk, the notebook I had given her for her birthday was still there, open to the first page. My handwriting was already smudged with tears. "Thank you for always being there for me, even though there was nothing special." Now there was that. Nothing was the most special thing, the thing I no longer deserved. Zoe stood up. She went to the data shelf silently, taking out the family holo album. Flipping through a few pages, she stopped at the picture of the three of us, her, Lyra, and me, taken at our Interstellar Academy graduation. In the photo, our eyes were all on the camera. The smiles were not forced, natural, relieved, as if no one thought that one day everything would change so much. We used to be people who were connected not by promises, but by habits, trust, and a sense of security. But it was those nameless things, when betrayed, that cut the deepest. That night, I didn't text Zoe, I didn't call Lyra either. I sat in the grav car in the Academy parking lot, looking out at the foggy space, alone. A familiar feeling because I used to like being alone. But today, this wasn't a chosen loneliness. This was the loneliness that came from losing. I used to think that a mistake could be fixed with an apology, but not every mistake has a chance to be fixed. There are cracks, once formed, that will always be there, as a reminder how much pain I used to cause others. I stopped going to Zoe's unit, not because we said anything to break things off, but because after that fateful day, between me and her, there was nothing left to say. Nothing left to say. I didn't text Zoe. Zoe didn't either. Neither did anyone block the other. No reproaches, no blocks, no unfollows. We still existed on each other's social data feeds like two shadows that used to be familiar, now strangers. But in real life, all the connections had been silently removed. Lyra didn't call either. I knew she might be waiting for a message from me, or maybe she hoped I would stay silent so that everything would settle like cosmic dust after a wave. Either way, I didn't contact her, not because I was angry, but because I didn't know what to say anymore. Every day that passed, I lived like a living corpse. I still went to class, still did my homework, still smiled faintly when my friends told nonsense stories. But I wasn't really there. I was like a person standing behind glass, watching my own life pass by without feeling touched anymore. Sometimes I passed by the data store where I had picked up Zoe's birthday notebook. Her name popped into my head like a familiar scratch, not bloody but still making me wince. I didn't stop, just walked by. But once I saw a girl sitting near the glass door, her head tilted to read a hollow book. Her back looked like Zoe's. Her hair was almost the same. I stood there, my heart clenched for a few seconds, but when the girl turned around, it wasn't her. And I didn't know if I felt disappointed or relieved. A week later, I heard that Zoe had moved out of Lyra's unit. She had gone to live with a relative in the suborbital suburbs, 2 hours away. I didn't know if she had left that day or if she had planned it. I didn't know what she left for Lyra or what she said before she left. All I knew was that she had chosen to leave everything, including me. People don't have to leave in anger. They just have to be quiet and not come back. That's enough for me to know I've lost them. I don't blame Zoe for breaking up. I don't blame Lyra for not holding on. I just see things falling apart without anyone doing anything to hold them together. And that leaves me feeling emptier than any criticism. I heard that Lyra still lives in the old unit. She still keeps the same routine, drinking tea in the morning, watering the plants in the afternoon, occasionally calling a grav plumber or changing a light bulb. But there is one small change. She no longer opens the door for anyone to enter as easily as before. No more smell of stardust cookies baking every afternoon. No more soft cosmic jazz music playing from the living area speakers. And absolutely no trace of me in that unit. It is as if Lyra has wiped away all the evidence herself, but cannot wipe away the feeling that lingers on her fingers every time she touches the familiar doorknob. A neighbor told me one morning she stood in front of the mirror in the living area for a long time. No hair, no makeup, just standing still, looking at herself. A 45-year-old woman who used to be attractive, strong, confident, now sees in the mirror a slightly blank face, sunken eyes, no lipstick, and an unknown gaze. I imagine what she was thinking at that moment. Maybe she was thinking about Zoe, her only daughter. Maybe she was thinking about me. Or maybe she wasn't thinking about anything, just trying to hear if her conscience was still talking to her. I was different. I didn't go near that unit anymore, but it was always in my head like a frozen scene. Every time I thought about it, every image appeared clearly. The stairs where Zoe stood, the light shining through the curtains, the broken laughter in the room where no one wanted to stay. My life went on, but since that day, I was no longer the same person I used to be. There was a part of me that was broken. Not completely, not easily seen, but really broken. I started to be afraid to make promises, afraid to create trust, afraid to get too close to anyone, for fear that one day I would hurt that person like I had hurt Zoe. One time I sat down to write an email to apologize, intending to send it to her. But every time I got to the third line, my hand stopped. I didn't know where to start, and most of all, I didn't know if I still had the right to say anything to her. Not all mistakes need to be forgiven. Some mistakes, the sentence is that we have to live with them forever. I met Lyra only once by chance at the Cosmic Mart near the Academy. She was choosing stellar apples. I walked past. Our eyes met very quickly. Neither of us said anything. I just nodded slightly and she pursed her lips. Her eyes were moist, as if she had just emerged from an unfinished dream. No one stopped. There was no need. Everyone has a moment in their life when everything is no longer the same. For me, that moment was at the window of Zoe's unit, where her eyes met mine for the last time. Quietly, without anger, but enough for me to know what I lost could not be found again. From that day on, I no longer looked at the world with the same eyes. The relationships around me, the girls I met, I always kept an invisible distance. It was as if there was a new boundary within me, not to protect myself, but to avoid hurting anyone again. I used to dream that one day I would accidentally meet Zoe again, maybe at a galaxy exhibition or a familiar star cafe. She would smile, I would hesitate, we would both be a little awkward, then share a few polite words. Maybe then everything would disappear like smoke. Or something would start again, slowly, cautiously, but that was just imagination. In fact, since the day she left, Zoe has never returned. Not a message, not a trace. She disappeared from my life like people close a chapter in a hollow book, gently but firmly. And I understand. There are people who only come into your life to remind you that you once had a chance and lost it. I still keep a few small things: the notebook she gave me, the photo of the three of us together, the note with my final year wishes. Each item is like a gentle reminder that everything that used to be was real, and now it belongs to the past. Memories don't die, they just learn to stay in a drawer that you don't open every day. I don't blame Zoe for disappearing. If I were her, I would also choose to leave, because I understand loving someone is not as bad as finding out that they used to love your own mother. Once I happened to read a sentence in an old hollow book: love doesn't always end with no more love. Sometimes it ends with a silence that no one dares to touch. I closed the book and thought, it's true. Between Zoe and me, there was never a word of goodbye. There was never a word of love either. But between what we've been through, perhaps there's no need. Because that silence makes everything deeper, more painful. Like a song that doesn't need a melody, but still makes people cry. Lyra is no longer in my life. I don't know if she tried to contact Zoe again. I don't know if she still kept that thin silk nightgown from that year. I don't know if she ever lay alone, looked up at the ceiling, and asked herself if only I had stopped sooner. I also don't know if time could be turned back. Would I have stopped, had enough courage to pull my hand away from temptation, be sober enough to see Zoe with different eyes? Or I will still slide down like I did. A part of me wants to go back and fix it, but the other part knows making mistakes is what makes you grow. I don't think I'm a bad person, but I know I did wrong. And sometimes to move on, one doesn't need forgiveness. Just dare to admit what you've lost and learn to carry it with you for the rest of your life. One night, I sat on the balcony of my dorm. It was cold. A few kids were laughing in the yard, the yellow lights shining through the light mist. I opened the notebook Zoe had given me, flipping to the last page. I wrote a line. I don't know what will happen next. I just know none of us will be the same people anymore. Maybe that's how some stories end, without fanfare, without conclusion. No one was completely right and no one was completely wrong. It just happened. And from that day on, each of us carries a scar, still there, but never fading. That was the day I lost not just Zoe, but the best part of myself. Thank you for listening to me tell this story to the end. I don't know what you think of me. Maybe you hate me, maybe you pity me, or maybe you find some familiarity in this story. I'm not telling this to be forgiven. I'm telling this because I need someone to know that someone like me once hurt the person I should have loved the most. See you next time, where aliens whisper tales from the cosmos. Remember to subscribe, like, and share the story if you enjoyed it.